Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's History is Lunch program. My name is Barry White, the incoming director of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. We're glad to have you all in our home today, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium and the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. I want to also welcome everybody joining on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching online, remember that our programs remain available to view at any time. If you're new to the History is Lunch series, each Wednesday at noon, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History hosts an hour-long program that explores different aspects of the state's past. Today continues our America 250 journey as we explore how Mississippi stories have shaped our nation. We're honored to welcome an exceptional panel who will share insights into the life and legacy of Mississippi's second longest serving member of Congress, Thad Cochran. To introduce our program, I'd like to invite Keith Hurd to offer a few opening remarks. Keith is the president of Key Impact Strategies and formerly served as chief of staff to Senator Cochran. Thank you all.
Thank you, Barry. It's good to be here. And if y'all will indulge me a bit, I would like to take a moment of silence for a dear friend of many of us in this room and the Senator Cochran, and have a moment of silence and thank God for the service of Grady Jolly as well as Senator Thad Cochran. If you'd bow your heads for a moment. Amen. Well, I assume that Grady and Thad are in the Grove right now, visiting with all their friends up in heaven. So it's good to have them back together again. And for those that don't know me, I'm Keith Hurd. I had the honor of working at Thad's first campaign and his last campaign. Well, at least in the primary runoff. And it was always a pleasure to work in his campaigns. And I say Thad because we all remember his first campaign sticker, Thad. And he was a senator, but he was Thad. And he wanted to be everybody's friend, as his constituent service report over there talks about. Thad and Neilsen are sons of Mr. W.H. and Miss Emma Grace, and they were educators. Miss Emma Grace taught math, and Mr. W.H. was a superintendent of the school district, and that's where Thad developed his love for education. And he was a lifelong supporter of education and the supporter of education funding, right, Mark? So he was very much in that. This would be a good time to recognize his family. Would the family please stand? Kate, Connie. It's always good to see y'all, Kate. It's been too long. This would also be a good time to recognize the extended family. Would everyone that's worked for Senator Cochran please stand? And would everyone that worked in his campaigns as a worker or volunteer please stand? I see Pete Perry out there. In the 2014 campaign, my daddy told me one time, he said, son, I can't wait to get up in the morning and see what kind of mess Pete got into last night. So, and then speaking of family, Thad Cochran was always learning and excelling. For example, he was an Eagle Scout. Serving as a Rotary Fellowship was one of his favorite things he accomplished and helped him develop into the leader that he was. The Navy service was important. And after becoming a lawyer, he and Rose moved to Jackson, and he got involved with the Young Lawyers Group at the support and urging of his dear friend P.F. Frank. And Thad credits that group as laying the groundwork for him to be elected in the future. The '68 Nixon campaign got him moving in politics. Democrats for Nixon, and he became noticed. The state GOP recruited him, and his good friend Billy Munger takes full credit for getting him to run and getting him elected. And a lot of that is true, but there are many other good friends that helped him and recruited him and got him going. Clark, Wirt, Haley, many others in this room. And Thad was very much a party man. He and Trent were elected in 1972, and then Thad was the first elected statewide official. I say the first elected because in Reconstruction, the senators were appointed by the legislature, not elected. So he was elected. And as Wiley Carter said, after he was sworn in December of '78, the church doors are always open. And being a Republican in a Democratic state, the doors did need to be open. And I know Wiley's sons are here and son-in-law. It's good to have them here. And I know Dad would want me to recognize Scott and the whole boys. So Craig, good to see y'all. Wiley was a great administrative assistant, which is now a chief of staff, and was part of the early politics for Senator Cochran. Senator Cochran took building the party seriously. While we developed a schedule back in the state while he was senator, he always had us call the county GOP chairman. Now, while he didn't always go see the chairman, he did want the chairman to know that we were coming and that he was going to be there, and he wanted them to be in the loop. And Haley will remember this. And our dear late friend Lanny Griffith, who was executive director at the time, when they'd have a big fundraiser, Senator Cochran would send me down to help build a crowd, raise money, and just be part of the effort. And back then, the URF dinners were huge. They had big speakers, big crowds, lots of enthusiasm, and I would love to see that come back today, and we're always working on that. So, with Senator Cochran being a party person, calling the county chairs, raising money, keeping his campaign apparatus in shape, at least in the early years, not only laid the groundwork for his reelection, it also built the party, leading to Trent Lott, Governor Fordyce, to Haley, to all the statewide and the majority in the House and Senate today. So we all grew from those early years. The Republican Party and Thad were together. And he did this with a lot of help from people in this room and across the state. And we thank you for that. Now we'll have a video of Senator Cochran. Then Brad's going to come up and lead the panel discussion of a great group. I'm going to leave his legislative accomplishments and judicial accomplishments to them. I just talk politics. Thank y'all.
One thing we want to be sure we have in a United States Senator is someone who can vote his convictions and vote the way the people of Mississippi believe and think.
He is the first Republican senator to represent Mississippi in this century. It is the poorest state in the nation, and Cochran has been able to help encourage some growth through creative rural housing and farm bills.
Senator Cochran has come a long way from his first job as a car hauler at Gunn's Dairy Bar near Jackson, Mississippi. Now he proudly serves the people of his state and helps craft legislation for the entire nation. Senator Thad Cochran has proven himself to be a leader and a statesman.
The Senate will now proceed to the consideration of S-196. Well, I really think that Mississippi is going to benefit greatly as a result of the action of our committee this morning. This comes at a good time to show everybody that a committee in Washington is working to make life and our environment in Mississippi a lot better.
We all know that Washington is filled with loud voices, but Senator Cochran's manner has served our friend and this institution very, very well.
The other day, I happened to run into one of my friends on the Democratic side, and he said, well, what are you going to do to us? I said, don't you worry about a thing. We're going to treat you fairly. And he said, oh, I hate to hear that. You've ruined my day.
They named him the quiet persuader.
Thad Cochran has been the quiet persuader. It's a testimony to the proven record that Senator Cochran has built over 38 years in this chamber.
Thad, welcome.
Mr. President,
Welcome back, I should
Thank
say.
you very
Good to
much.
see you. Delighted.
You know, the historians will have to judge whether or not you were part of the solution or part of the problem.
Like this in Mississippi. A lot of jobs are going to be created as a result of this project.
And I'll be satisfied with the judgment.
Reminds me of how important our collective efforts are for the future of our country, our economy, peace in our time, and in helping assure that we make our time here a positive influence over the opportunities that are available for our citizens to enjoy life safe and secure with good leaders, common sense leaders.
Oh, that video kind of gets me a little bit every time I see it. If the panel will come on up and make your way here. I am Brad White, and it's an honor to participate in today's program about a man whose name is woven into the very fabric of Mississippi, United States Senator Thad Cochran. He was more than a leader. He was a steady hand in moments when steadiness mattered most. As it's been said in a world that often rewards noise, he led with quiet conviction, guided by principle rather than applause. I had the privilege of working for him, but more importantly, of learning from him. How to listen before speaking, how to stand firm without losing grace, how to serve something greater than yourself. Now, I must admit, and I'm sure my wife will attest to this, that I'm still working to achieve those qualities. But Senator Cochran embodied them each and every day. He carried the weight of responsibility with humility, and he never forgot that public service at its core is about people. What I will remember most is not just the statesman the public saw, but the man behind it. Thoughtful, decent, and deeply committed to doing what was right by the people he served, even when it wasn't easy. His legacy isn't only found in the policies he shaped or the offices he held, but in the example that he set for those of us that followed him. I'm better off for having known him, and like so many others, I will carry his lessons forward. His voice may be gone, but the standard he set will continue to guide us. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We have a very distinguished panel, all of whom have provided great service to our state and nation in their own rights. Former Governor Haley Barbour, who chaired most all of Senator Cochran's campaigns in the Senate and longtime friend, former Chief of Staff and current Mississippi State University President, Dr. Mark Keenum, Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Leslie Southwick, and a former United States Marshal and longtime Cochran staffer, Mr. Nehemiah Flowers. Let's give them a round of applause. As we go through this, I'm going to ask the panelists to make sure you hold your mic up to your mouth so everybody can hear what you're saying. But we're going to start with Governor Barbour leading us off about Senator Cochran's early years and his place in Mississippi history as being the first Republican elected to a statewide office here in the state. Governor.
Thank you, Brad. Is that good enough? I first got to know Thad in the '68 campaign. I was working for the Nixon campaign, and Thad, as Keith mentioned, was very involved through the Young Lawyers Association. And I had forgotten that he was the chairman of Democrats for Nixon, but he soon grew over that. Thad had a way about him that was always attractive and made you want to be around him. Yeah, I've got a photograph in my office in Washington of him and me sitting across the table from each other laughing, and the description on it, his inscription on it is "Happy Haley." You know, because we were sitting there laughing. He stayed involved and became a Republican between the '68 campaign and when he ultimately decided to run for Congress in '72. In '69 and '70, we worked together when I was the state director of the census. And Thad was somebody who I valued their advice, and he always was good enough about giving it to me. I was executive director of the state party in '72 when he and Trent ran. And interestingly, my wife, Marcia, was the first paid employee of Thad's congressional campaign in 1972. My mother got sick late in the summer, and we had to move in with her, so Marcia had to step down, but Thad always treated her like she was a queen, you know, because he valued what she had done in the campaign. You know, my job as executive director of the state party in the '72 campaign was not to elect Nixon or re-elect Nixon. That was a gimme. My job was to figure out how to use Nixon to elect Trent and Thad. And so we set up phone banks, and some of you are old enough to have worked in the phone banks, where the message was calling voters, "Hi, I'm Haley Barbour with the Nixon campaign, and President Nixon wanted me to call you and ask you to vote for Thad Cochran." And it worked. They were, some of you will remember Prentice Walker, who was elected in '64 on Goldwater's coattails, and then did not, he tried to step up and he lost. Well, Trent and Thad, they were there to stay. And as Keith very well stated, Thad was a party guy. He believed in the party. He tried to promote the party. He tried to give credibility to the party. And as the guy who was running the party at the time, I thought he was pretty damn good. Seeing the Carter brothers remind me of their dad, of course, Wiley Carter, who was Thad's top political guy in his office. And so somebody that I worked with a lot. And Thad was kind of low key about it, but Thad liked politics. And he liked doing the right things for the right reasons. And that's good politics. Good policy is good politics, as Ronald Reagan used to say. So Thad, and with Wiley and he had a great staff. Some of them are here. Fat fingers. But when he was in the House, getting ready after the 76 election, when he was reelected easily, I wrote a paper for him on running against Senator Eastland. He thought about it and decided not to run against Senator Eastland. And then I, being a good party guy, agreed to manage Charles Pickering's campaign because Charles had had filed to run. Well, before I knew it, Eastland dropped out. Thad got in, and I told Thad I just felt like I couldn't back out on Pickering, and he was nice about it. More than nice, the day after the primary was over and Thad had won the primary, he asked me to run his campaign for senator against Eastland. He remembered the paper I had written about how we ought to try to do this. And Thad he absorbed thought. And so the next paper I wrote for him was to lay out a plan for his first year as senator. Because in Mississippi, Senator Eastland and Senator Stennis did not go out and campaign. They didn't, if you want to see Eastland, you had to go up to Itawamp, whatever county it is. Thank you. But he wanted to have a serious political operation in his Senate operation. And that was all perfectly legally accepted. And let me say, I've got some more things that I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to wait and talk about them when we're talking about Nehemiah and some of the things that Thad did that made a huge difference for the party for the last 50 years.
That would be a good segue in. This board that you see up here, anybody that served on Senator Cochran's staff will recognize it. He drafted a memo that he himself typed and that Doris Wagley, his longtime assistant, or he wrote it out and Doris typed it up. This particular page deals with general responsiveness. It was his idea of how he wanted his office to do what the governor was talking about in dealing with the public and dealing with Mississippi. Just reading you a couple of lines from it, and then I want Dr. Keenum and Nehemiah to speak on Senator Cochran's viewpoint of serving the public. But Thad wrote, "We are all in a job to represent all our constituents. We're not the bureaucracy. A constituent who asks us for help should be assumed to be in need of help with our office as his last resort. A constituent who writes a letter should be made to feel by our response that he's glad he wrote us. A constituent who claims to have been wronged by the government should be assumed to be correct. Everyone should guard against developing the attitude that we are better than, smarter than, or more important than any constituent." And that was the conduct that Senator Cochran demanded among his staff. So Nehemiah, you were in the House staff and Senate, and Dr. Keenum, would y'all speak a little bit about that?
Roger. I met Thad Cochran when I was at WLBT, and I was producing a program called Meet the Candidate. And Thad and Ellis Beaudron were the two people I had aboard. And after the program was on, Thad called me and said, how would you like to come and work for me? And I was a little ticked off because I had asked for a raise, and Bill Dillday said, no, we're not going to give you a raise. And I was a little ticked off because I was producing a couple of programs and making commercials, and my cohort over in Atlanta was not doing all that. And but anyway, Dad called and said, how about come and work with me? And I said, well, I'm not a Republican. He said, I didn't ask you that. He said, well, come and have lunch with me. And I did. And the rest is history. I said, I went to work for him. And I enjoyed that. And I said that when I started working for him, we would do things that was out of the ordinary. I said, Dad, why don't we go down and ask Charles if we can be in the Evers Parade? He said, why don't you call him and see if he would allow us to do that? So I called Charles, and Charles said, he wanted to be in the Evers Parade? And I said, yeah. And Charles was a little surprised with that. And we got in my little old Pontiac, and we were in the parade. The next thing out of the ordinary, I said, Dad, let's go to the Jackson State Alcorn Parade. I mean, not parade, but football game. And we got up and started parading around the stadium, and people started hollering, hey, Flowers, is that your daddy? And Thad held on, and we would wave at the crowd. And that's something our opponent was not doing. Another thing we were doing was that we would, at lunch, we would stop. And Thad said, let's eat lunch at Mickey D's. Mickey D's? I don't want to eat lunch at Mickey D's. We would eat lunch at Mickey D's, and Thad would get up and start walking around Mickey D's. Hi, I'm Thad Cochran. I'm running for Congress. And people would start saying, Flowers. Well, people would know me because of the television thing. He's a Republican. We're not going to vote for a Republican. And after a month or so ago, people would call me at home and say, man, who is this Thad Cochran? He's a Republican. And people would start latching on to Thad Cochran. Thad Cochran was doing things out of the ordinary. Thad hired me as a press secretary, and I was not working out as a secretary, as a press secretary, but Thad kept me on because he was a good man. There was a man on staff called John T. Smith, who Thad kept on from Montgomery. And I took on John T.'s slot. And he said, I want you to stay on and take John T.'s job. I want you to do everything that John T. does. And I followed John T. around. John T. did casework. When I said casework, I mean things like helping people with Social Security, helping people with welfare. And that's what John T. did. And I started doing the same thing, helping people and reaching out to casework. That was the turning point in doing casework, helping people do things out of the ordinary. I went to Thad one day and said, Thad, we need to get more people on the staff that look like me. And guess what we did? He said, well, who will you think? Stand up, Barbour Rooks. People on the side of the fence didn't have anybody that looked like Barbour Rooks or Nehemiah Flowers. A changing point in Thad Cochran. Thad Cochran would listen. Thad Cochran did things people on the other side of the fence, Stennis and Eastland, was not doing. A changing point in the Republican side.
Yes, sir. Dr. Keenum?
Am I right, Governor?
You're absolutely right. And for those of you that don't know it, Nehemiah was the first African American to work for anybody on the Hill, Republican or Democrat, since Reconstruction.
Well, absolutely, Senator Cochran was someone who cared for people. He cared for Mississippi. He loved this state. You know, this letter that Brad alluded to that was given to the staff about how we're to interact with constituents. They're Mississippians. It didn't matter if they were Republicans or Democrats. They voted for them or didn't vote for them. If they needed help, he was going to help them. And he had a great team. And, you know, when I joined the staff in 1989, we had just one state office, and it was in Jackson. And those people there in that office, that's what they did full time, was to help serve and help people who had an issue with the government. And he wanted people to feel good that they called Thad Cochran or asked him for their help. And that's what he was committed to doing. Now, when I went to work for him, I didn't know Thad Cochran. I'd never met Senator Cochran. First time I met him, I was his employee. But he was a senior leader on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and he knew how important that was for the state of Mississippi to serve our farmers. It's the largest economic sector in Mississippi, and he took that role very, very, very seriously. And he wanted a PhD ag economist who had ties to Mississippi State University and understood and had connections in the farm community to serve him on that committee. And that's how I got selected. A guy named Bill LaForge, who was our chief of staff at the time, he actually hired me. And so I remember not long after I was in his office, and this was right on the eve of the 1990 Farm Bill. It's a big legislation that affects all of our farmers, and not just from Mississippi, but nationwide. And of course, young economist and training and research methodology, and I was bringing all that very technical aspect to my job, and I requested an appointment with him. And I remember going into his office, and just the two of us, and I had laid out a strategy for him for the upcoming Farm Bill, and I had poured a lot of my time and effort into this. And he very patiently sat there and listened to me for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then finally he interrupted me, and he said, Mark, he said, look, he said, writing a farm bill, it's easy. It's not hard to write a farm bill. You know, my heart was racing, okay? And he said, let me tell you. He said, if there's an amendment or provision in the bill and it's good for Mississippi and good for Mississippi agriculture, I'm going to be for it. I'm going to support it. And then if it's a provision that's bad for Mississippi agriculture and the state, I'm going to be against it. It's just that simple. And I thought, well, that is pretty simple. And then he looked at me and he said, and that's what I've got you for. Your job is to tell me what the farmers and what the leaders in agriculture in Mississippi, they want me to support and be for and be against. It was just that simple in his mind. And so I was his liaison. our legislative staff, not just for this ag committee, but for all of our team in Washington, our legislative staff who had legislative responsibilities, their jobs, number one, was to connect back to our constituents back in Mississippi to understand what their needs are, what their wishes for him to support and be for. And that was very simple. And that's what I did when I worked with him. And then, you know, someone was mentioning a while ago about the kind of person that he is and how he interacts with constituents, Brad. And I remember one day, this was some years later, and I had by then become his chief staff, and we had a meeting with a group of ladies, and they were from DeSoto County. That's all I remember. It was about 5 ladies, and they were a little bit older ladies. And they came in, they were all dressed up, you know, to come see Senator Cochran. And we had a nice meeting with him, and I remember it was a very, very, very busy day, and I was kind of like looking at my watch, you know, we got to get this, y'all got to move on, you know. But he sat there and listened to these ladies, and they talked to him. Finally, the meeting was over with, and we were walking out of the office, and one of the ladies said, "Can I go back in there and tell Senator Cochran one more thing?" And I'm like, "Sure." So she goes back in there, and he's standing at his desk, and she speaks to him, and I can see her grab both of his hands and shake both of his hands and held him close, and then she left. Well, later that day, that evening actually, he and I were together, and we were just visiting and talking about the day, and he said, "You know, Mark, I think I was paid the highest honor I have ever been paid today." And I thought, my goodness, what was that? He said, "Do you remember when that group of ladies from DeSoto County came in to visit with me this morning?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, Miss so-and-so, she came back to my desk after the meeting. And she came up to me and she thanked me again for taking the time to meet with her group. And then she looked at me and she said, 'Senator Cochran, I have got to tell you, you are an eloquent listener.'" Isn't that great? And he was. If you were ever in his presence, he listened to you. He focused on you and what you were talking about. And you know when people don't really pay attention to what, you know, they're looking at their watch like I was doing when they were in there. He didn't treat people like that. He was so respectful of anyone that he ever met with and visited with. And then I guess my last little deal on maybe kind of his philosophy as a senator. I remember one day I was down in the Senate Dirksen buffet. Buffet there where you could grab a quick bite to eat in the Dirksen building. And I was there by myself. I was down there grabbing something quick, and Senator Trent Lott and his chief of staff, Billy Gottschall, were down there having lunch, and they saw me and they waved me over and said, "Sit down and join us." And I did. And during the conversation at lunch, Senator Lott, he said, "Mark, did you see the Heritage Foundation's report that came out today on the rankings of senators?" I said, "No, sir, I didn't see that this morning." He said, and the Heritage Foundation would rank senators, all 100, from the most conservative senator to the least conservative senator. Well, that report came out that morning, and Senator Cochran was ranked like number 3. Third most conservative senator in the United States Senate. Well, Senator Lott was ranked like number 6. And he said, "I can't understand how the Heritage Foundation would rank Thad more conservative than I am. I just don't understand that." And so later that day, I was with Senator Cochran, and I conveyed that conversation I had with Trent Lott. And Senator Cochran, he said, "Yep." He said, that ranking is very accurate. He said, I do vote more conservative than Trent. Not much, but I do. And he said, "Listen, the people of Mississippi elected me to vote for them, and they're conservative. And they expect me to vote very conservatively. But he said, I speak when I talk moderately. And I think that's why he was so beloved in Mississippi. He didn't wear his conservatism out on his shirt sleeve, or he didn't put it out in your face all the time. When he spoke to people in Mississippi, he talked to them. He understood Mississippians, and he wanted to convey to them that he was there to help them and support them. But when it came time to cast that vote, yeah, he was one of the most conservative senators in the United States Senate. And if you ask the average person, probably back when the two of them were there, between the two, who would you say is the most conservative? Most people would say Trent Lott, but not what the voting record would reflect. That's the kind of senator that Thad Cochran was.
I thought where you were going with this when you said taking a memo to him, if you worked for Senator Cochran and wrote something for him, or at least this was my experience, he would just eviscerate everything you would have on it. He had an ability of reducing a complex matter down to its simple place, like Dr. Keenum was saying. And I remember one story I'll tell before we move to the judiciary was during the first Trump administration, there was a appointee that President Trump had made that had not been very friendly to appropriators, which Senator Cochran was one. And he put a hold on the nomination in order for the guy to come to see him at his office. And he came to see him and all. And about a week later passed, and I went into his office and he said, look, I don't want to get too cute about this. Call over and release my hold and call the congressman and tell him that I intend to vote for his confirmation. And I said, yes, sir. And we talked on about a few other things. And then before I left, I said, okay, I'm going to call over and release the hold, and I'm going to call the congressman and tell him that you plan to vote for him. We look forward to working with him. And he went, no. He said, you only convey the facts as you know it. And the facts that we know are I'm releasing the hold and I'm going to vote for him. We may not enjoy working with him worth a damn. So that had an impact on me to try to be sure to speak when you talk. We're very proud to have Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Leslie Southwick.
Let me share one other
Sure.
story with you. I stopped Janice one day in the hall while she was still working for Stennis. And I said, Janice, would you like to work for Stennis, for Cochran? She said, no way, I'm not working for no Republican. She said, my daddy would roll over in his grave if my daddy would roll over in his grave if I started working for a Republican. And you see where she's sitting. But one stupid thing that the marshal had done, Thad had invited me to Washington, and I had eaten in the Senate dining room. Oh, I hate telling this story. And he introduced me to Kennedy. Governor, I walked over to Kennedy's table and I looked down, I said, Senator Kennedy, we've got more blacks on the table on our staff than you do. I was so embarrassed when I thought about what I said, but I said it. And why I said that, I don't know. But I mean, we did. We had more blacks on our staff than Senator Kennedy. But we were the most conservative. I'll set up with that.
Well, I think it bears saying that Senator Cochran was very serious from the beginning of representing all of Mississippi. It didn't matter of anything. When we talk about building the party, it was those efforts that he made. And what we're about to get into now with the judiciary, people forget that it was the Republican senator that recommended the first African-American federal judge in Mississippi, among the first African-American U.S. Marshals that Mississippi had, and among the first congressional staff we had. But one of Senator Cochran's huge legacies was what Judge Southwick referred to as the Cochran Court. And so at this time, Judge, we'll let you make your presentation here.
I hate to follow a story
like Nehemiah just told, you're going to have some pictures up there, some little bit of information about how much of an impact he had. It won't be as colorful as Governor Barbour and President Keenum and this fella right here, but I'll do my best. Keith has already mentioned the passing of a great colleague. 3 other Fifth Circuit judges are here today. A lovely man and a loved man. Died Monday. And he was on the Fifth Circuit since July of 1982, thanks to Thad Cochran. There was a tribute to Senator Cochran put out by Mark, another university in North Mississippi that has a law school, in 2018. And Grady wrote one of the tributes to Senator Cochran. And he starts by saying that he met Senator Cochran, he didn't say the first day, but early in their joint freshman year at Ole Miss. I let it out at college. And 71 years later, he is now perhaps been reunited with Senator Cochran. Many of you knew Betty, Grady's wife. She died in 2014. And there was always a dog in the Jolly family. So I miss Grady and Senator Cochran. So this starts Senator Cochran's role in judicial selection. First Republican senator in 100 years from Mississippi. But when he became a senator, a Democrat was president. The senior senator was John Stennis. So his role in the only selection that last 2 years of the Carter term was minimal. He said Senator Stennis called him. Senator Cochran would return the favor to the junior senator in the future. But he was called by Senator Stennis to say he was going to name LT Senator, recommend LT Senator President Carter. And he was named at that time. Senator Cochran was on the Judiciary Committee. So his first 2 years in the Senate, he did agree to that. These gentlemen would know better, but as I recall Thad telling me many years after that, he thought after 2 years on the Judiciary Committee, it was time to find something else to do. He thought that was not the way to help Mississippi, just go through all that with Senate nominees. So he did not stay very long there. So 1981, President Reagan's election in 1981, he starts to have a role, a much more serious role in selection of federal judges. I thought this was a very forward-looking cartoon as early as 1983 in the newspaper of record here in Jackson back in those days. And that's called, make sure I get it right, the Cochran Court. That was awful early to be calling it the Cochran Court, but it was certainly foresighted to say that. President Reagan taking over, and the first vacancy was J.P. Coleman. It was interesting. J.P. Coleman, a longtime Democrat, waited until the election of Ronald Reagan to announce his resignation, whatever that might mean, but that is the reality of it. So back to Grady. That was his nominee. That was his selection. Trent Lott, great public servant as well, was closer to President Reagan than was perhaps Senator Cochran, having worked for him in the presidential campaign. So there was a battle for a year between those two powerful members of Congress. What finally resolved it is that only Cochran was a member of the Senate, and Senate Committee Chairman Strom Thurmond eventually let it be known that anybody who Senator Cochran doesn't want confirmed will not be confirmed, and Grady Jolly was nominated not long thereafter. I hardly recognize Grady in that picture, but that is from the hearing in July of 1982. So under President Reagan, those district judges were all selected. In that same 1983 article from the Clarion Ledger, Senator Cochran talks some about what he looked for in nominees. And again, he'd only been involved in 2 so far, Judge Jolly and William Barbour, a relative of someone at the podium here. First cousins? Is William your first cousin? So outstanding members. He knew a good number of them, and that's one of the things he said in the article, that he didn't need a lot of recommendations from early at first because he knew the people that had gone through law school, and there was one accredited law school only in Mississippi until the 1980s, if I remember MC's accreditation right. So he knew a lot of the lawyers early on that he would be naming, recommending to the president. So that's a list, a very impressive list. Some of them are here, and I thank you for coming to this, even though you probably knew I was be speaking, but I appreciate you coming anyway. George Bush also announced so many vacancies during his 4-year term. And by then, there was another Republican U.S. Senator, Trent Lott. My understanding is that they basically alternated on district judges, on who would have the lead in naming. Judge Pickering was first in the selection, and he was closer to Trent Lott. David Bramlett came second. But there was one Fifth Circuit vacancy as well, and Reese Barksdale is here. Senator Cochran and Reese went back well before this selection, and indeed, Senator Cochran had been helping, trying to get either President Reagan or President Reagan basically to nominate Reese, Judge Barksdale. And finally, a new seat opened up from Louisiana. It's a powerful U.S. senator who can steal a seat from another state, and that's what Senator Cochran was able to do. One of the things that Judge Barksdale reminded me recently about is the persistence of Senator Cochran. And the phrase that he used, and I won't quote it quite correctly, I'm sure, is that he would lie down at the bottom of the driveway and not let anybody leave until he got what he wanted. I looked for pictures of that, the best I could find. All the bodies on driveways were not very suitable, all the pictures that I found. So then we have another president, and obviously his role when the Democrat is president would be less than it would have been otherwise. But that is not a Democrat stalwart up there on the picture, and Trent Lott had a fair amount to do with Alan Pepper being selected as a district judge. George W. Bush had more selections had the same number of selections, I think, as President Reagan did. All those folks still serving ably, even Mike Mills serving ably. I saw Mike earlier somewhere in here, I thought. So anyway, but an outstanding group. And some here, some on the coast, some in North Mississippi. And then two more again. He was basically signing off on people, but was quite willing to support nominees that came through more of the Democrat process. One thing that I should have played off that Haley mentioned earlier is that it shows the kind of man he is, that when Judge Pickering was recommended to be a district judge, despite that he had been Senator Cochran's opponent back in 1978, I can say it didn't bother him. I didn't talk to him about it, but he was fully supportive of Judge Pickering and allowed his nomination to go forward. That's a picture of the five of us back when there were 5 Fifth Circuit judges from Mississippi with Judge Jolly's passing. That's not the case anymore, but I did want to show that. The tremendous new colleague, Corey T. Wilson, back there, he was sworn in by Judge Jolly, his predecessor. And he is certainly upholding maybe not quite the wit, you're a funny man, but he is upholding the quality of work that Judge Jolly did, and I thank him. Now, I will give him credit or discredit for this, but Corey calls this the Fab Five. If you want to pick up on that, that's all right with me. So there's some stats. Senator Cochran was certainly a long-serving senator, but the state was fairly old by the time he became a U.S. senator. Yet still, he recommended as many district judges in his time in the Senate as had been named for the whole previous 160 years of statehood. And the same thing with Fifth Circuit judges from Mississippi. It was 5 before he became a U.S. senator and 5 after he became a U.S. senator. So a powerful impact. And what better name for the courthouse in the capital city than the Thad Cochran Courthouse? I don't know who with state government is here could help on that, but it's getting badly mildewed. I wish somebody would go out there and clean that wall. And I thought that was a fitting closing. So that is my story of his legacy.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. We're about to run out of time, so I want to move through the panel once more and just give you all opportunity to make what closing remarks. We'll start with Governor Barbour and just move back to Judge Southwick.
I want to say something that maybe y'all haven't read because it was written in Washington for Washington, but the Washington Post described Thad Cochran in the Senate as the quiet persuader. And that was Mark, that's a pretty accurate description. He got what he wanted almost all the time, but he never tried to bully anybody.
Well, you know, this state, if you look around and travel around the state of Mississippi, you see his legacy everywhere. Brad, from the highways that we travel on, the bridges we cross, DeSoto County wouldn't be DeSoto County today if it weren't for Thad Cochran's investments in infrastructure. Just the wastewater system alone has enabled that community, that county to grow. Go any university campus you go to, you're going to see a Thad Cochran presence there. Federal courthouses, all the things that he built and gave back to support the citizens of the state. You know, he was an appropriator. He actually chaired the Appropriations Committee twice. And thank goodness, the governor, when we had the terrible disaster of Katrina, to have this guy as our governor, but also to have Senator Cochran as our chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee to help rebuild our state. We're so blessed as a state from his engagement. He always said, you know, when he felt like people talk about appropriators and spending too much money. Well, no, the appropriators don't spend too much. It's when you set the budget. He would always argue the debate on how much we're going to spend is when we set the federal budget. But once that budget is set and that money is approved, it's going to get spent. He always felt like it could be spent in Mississippi as well as anywhere else in the country. And that was his commitment. And he obviously, agriculture, ag committee, farm bills, all the things he did, he was proud of his leadership role. But one of the things people don't really associate with him was national security and national defense. He was a strong advocate, especially in armed services, defense appropriations and things he did, and strong Navy. He supported the Navy shipbuilding in a huge way, but also missile defense. Ballistic missile defense was a passion for him. And I remember in the late 90s, he was able to get on the Governmental Affairs Committee, and he took over the chairmanship of a very unique subcommittee on international security and proliferation, weapons and missile proliferation. And he took that role and he provided leadership because he was passionate about getting a ballistic missile defense system for our nation. And he led the effort with Senator Daniel Inouye, Democrat from Hawaii, a dear friend of his, to pass the National Missile Defense Act of 1999. And that set in motion technologies that we are benefiting from right now as a country. And I can tell you that if you're watching what's going on in the Middle East, especially obviously Iran and all these missiles that are being shot, fired, well, a lot of them are being knocked down. Most of them are being knocked down. And it's because of his leadership and his funding. In fact, one of the main missile defense weapons is called THAAD. Think about that. He had vision for our nation and for our future. And so many people don't really realize that, but he was a passionate advocate for our national security and national defense.
Mark, I remember in an article that was written about Senator Cochran, I forget who wrote it, it may have been Sid Salter, but he commented about very few people can put on their resume, this was after Katrina, saved their state from financial ruin. But that was the role that he played after that. Nehemiah?
When I was a marshal, I wanted to start a task force to hunt bad guys. And I told Thad I wanted to start a task force. I think it was the following week, I had someone from appropriations in my office, and I got $100,000 because of the senator to start a task force, and it was appropriated.
I hardly deserve the closing remark, but I will say that my experience in a very difficult confirmation process, probably deservedly so, back in 2007, I saw how respected, beloved even, Senator Cochran was by Democrats, that he was able to create these relationships that very much redounded to my benefit, but it redounded for 30 plus years, 40 years, to the state's benefit, that he created the kinds of understanding and support from others that a lot of senators never get because they just aren't maybe as consistently focused on things like that. And so I admire the way Senator Trent Lott treated others, and it was very much to everybody's benefit that he did that.
In closing, I'd like to say something about when he retired. So I was there, and I can tell you exactly how all of that happened. Senator Cochran's health began failing toward the end of 2017. And there was an omnibus bill that had been put together to fund all of government. And the United States Senate at the time, to Judge Southwick's point, was 50-50 Republican Democrat. And Vice President Pence was basically having to camp out at the US Senate in order to cast tie-breaking votes. And when Senator Cochran got sick, and we first started talking about retirement, Leader McConnell and others said he can't retire until this bill is passed because we have no margin of error here. And everybody's going to hold on to that bill because everybody in the Senate trusts Senator Cochran to be true to his word and to pass all of the things that had been agreed upon, and et cetera, et cetera. So we marched on for a few more months until it was finally passed. And I was having lunch at the 116 Club. And Kay called me. And she said, Dad wants to see you. So I went over to their house, and they were in the second floor at the house. And the senator was sitting on the couch, and I sat down by him. And he said, now that we have the bill, it was about to be passed and be voted on. He said, I believe it's time for me to retire and go home. He said, can you get a press release drafted? And I reached into my pocket and pulled one out that I had drafted about 3 months earlier and gave to him, waiting on him to make his decision. And he read it. In my memory, it seemed like it took an eternity for him to read that. And when he got through, he looked at me and he simply said, this seems a little braggadocious, don't you think? And I said, Senator, you're the longest serving member of Congress. You can't just say I quit. You know, right? And so he gave Kay the release to read, and he said, what do we need to do now? And I was like, well, I need to go back and inform the staff first. I said, I think you should call Governor Bryant, obviously, Leader McConnell, Senator Wicker, and we talk about his relationship and ability to work across the aisle. I mentioned the longest serving Democrat senator. I said, I would expect you'd like to call Senator Leahy, who had served on appropriations and agriculture with him all of those years. And so he set out to make those phone calls, and I went back to the office. We got the staff notified, and that evening was a vote, and I went with them to the Senate, and we were sitting on the Senate floor, and one by one, people were coming by thanking him for his service. And I don't think I've ever seen so many people congregate on one part of the Senate floor. And all of a sudden, the doors bust open from the Republican side, and it was Pat Leahy. He was the only one of those 4 calls that Senator Cochran didn't get that afternoon. And I said, Senator, here comes Senator Leahy. So Senator Cochran stood up. Senator Leahy walks over, bear of a man, grabs him on both shoulders, and he said, Thad, we were supposed to go out together. And Senator Cochran said, well, Pat, I just gave out quicker than you did. And they embraced on the Senate floor, shook hands. Senator Leahy went to his side, and Senator Cochran sat back down. And I can tell you our nation could use a lot more relationships like that among our leaders. I I want to thank each of you gentlemen for your service to our state and nation, your time today, and most of all for your love of Senator Cochran. I thank Keith Hurd. Yeah, I'm going to get to it if you get with it. That's why I got notes. I want to thank Keith and the talented staff at the two museums for all of your contributions on today's program. I think what we've really been reminded of is that Senator Cochran's legacy isn't just something to be studied, but it's something to be carried forward. He showed us that you can be effective without being loud, that you can be strong without being harsh, and that real leadership is measured not by headlines, but by results that improve people's lives. In a time when division often seems easier, he chose cooperation. And in a world, and anybody around politics knows this, in a world that rewards credit, Thad always focused on simply getting things done. For those of us who had the privilege to know him or serve under him, the charge is clear. We honor his legacy not simply by remembering it, but by living it, by treating others with respect, by putting service above self, and by never losing sight of who we're here to serve. Mississippi and this country are all better off because of Thad Cochran, and now it's up to all of us to carry his example forward. I want to thank all of you for coming, and before I turn it back over to the museums, as Keith mentioned, we likely will not get all of the Cochran staff and those that were part of the Cochran team and family together again like this. So when this is over, if you would please come down front, we're going to try to get a photograph of everybody with that. But Barry, I'll turn it back to you or Drew. Drew.
Let's give a round of applause again to our panel. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We hope that you'll come back. We're every Wednesday at noon right here for History's Lunch at the two Mississippi Museums. We'd love to have you back. The staffers, volunteers, we'd love to have you guys come up and have a picture right afterwards. One more time for our incredible panel.
I really love your presentation.
Well, we make a good team, you know that?
I wish I could have turned around and saw that.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Flowers. To Southwick. Thank you. I appreciate it. President Keenum, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you. Governor, thank you, sir.